Well, greetings.
Thank you.
Nice to welcome you to the Castle of the Muses, Susan. And you've come up for a conference, I know, in Glasgow.
That's right, yes.
With mediumship training and all that. We'll come on to that at the end, I hope, about your work as a medium. But I'm interested, because you're a scholar of different religions, you've studied widely in philosophy, and that's what this castle's about. You know? So tell us a bit about your background, where you were from, your origins, as it were. How someone like you got interested in comparative spirituality.
Well, I was brought up in a kind of, council estate in South Leeds.
Right.
And my parents were just regular people, they had no interest whatsoever in anything esoteric or spiritual or magical, or anything to do with the other world was completely alien to both mum and dad.
Right.
But as far as I can remember, I've always had spiritual experiences. And thinking back, as long as I could, I thought about God and the universe and, what is the nature of reality and why are we here, and all those questions that have kind of perplexed philosophers for, thousands of years. And I'd ask questions. My mum and dad were, kind of constantly besieged by stupid questions while, dad was trying to watch the racing and things like that, do you ever think about God and where is God, and, do you think we might be God, and all these sort of things, which your average, person is just, no way. And I'd keep, often saying to my mum, I've had my granddad round, and granddad had died when I was 3, so, granddad turned up and he said, and obviously there were things that my mum thought were really kind of, so there were issues.
You were getting messages even
I was getting messages, but as a child, as a tiny child.
That were factually correct.
Factually correct messages.
And they must have impressed your mother.
Well, I think they frightened my mother, because she thought, well, what do I do? Because she said to me, do not say this in front of anybody. Do not say this in front of the neighbours, or do not, when
so you had to suppress your
skills.
So
she made it very clear that, this is an area that is very special, but she didn't say special. It was just kind of, we don't go there. So I always thought, now, because I've been told not to talk about it, it must be something special to be cultivated. So I decided to sit and to meditate and to tune in to something other, to some other higher power that no one else guided me in, but I was starting to communicate with spirit guides and helpers. And they kind of guided me in the processes of attunement.
What sort of age are we now?
Oh, I was tiny. I mean, I was maybe 3-4 years old.
Oh, this is very early.
Really early. And I went to, we had the electric cupboard in the kitchen where everything was dark, and the soft hum of the electricity meter just kind of lulled me into an altered state, and I'd kind of sit there with my eyes open, watching images, kind of manifest before my eyes, which of course are all part of ancient mystical traditions of isolation and dwelling in caves.
Like Kogi Indians.
Yes, and even in African traditions where before initiations there are times of isolation where the initiate is kind of secluded and placed in a dark space. And you also have this in Dzogchen as well, in the Tibetan traditions of dark retreats. So I was kind of doing.
You're doing it spontaneously.
Spontaneous dark retreats in the electric cupboard. When I got to be about 5, my mum, she thought, well, take her to the library, because I could read already. My mum, because I was an only child.
Okay.
She was very insistent.
She was good at teaching.
Good at kind of, basics of letters and not so much with the numbers, but with the letters. And I could read, so it was thought, well, if we take her to the library, she'll find Janet and John or Bar the elephant, and it'll all be very settling and stabilising.
Right.
But that didn't happen, because I kind of boddled out of the children's section and suddenly saw the occult section, and it was like, wow,
You're 5 at the time.
I'm 5.
Right.
And I remember it was a Friday evening, quite late in the library's kind of opening times. So. I chose a huge book on the history of astrology with this kind of blue and black cover, and I really wanted it. And my mum said, you can't have that, you won't understand that. Now, there's nothing so bad as to say to me, you won't understand that. It's too old for you, or, it's beyond your understanding. And I was really insistent, I want it. And the librarian at the time she said, oh, 5 minutes before closing, choose your books. And of course we had no other option but to get the book. And I went home and I started to read it, and of course I understood kind of 3 words in 20, it was kind of touch and go.
Advanced astrology.
Oh, well, it was historical. It was about, various astrological thinkers and developments in astrology over, kind of hundreds and hundreds of years. So it took me 3 months to read it, and my mum was kind of, thinking, when she's finished with this,
back to Janet and John.
Janet and John, Bar the Elephant. We're not going to have this fiasco again. So when I took the book back after months of kind of renewing, I took it back, and then I saw another book on the history of the witch trials, and I was fascinated by all these testimonies of ancient witches. And medieval, practitioners of ancient magical law, and that really interested me. So I really felt that I was kind of trying to kind of feed into something, because of course they refer to familiars and spirits and help and guides and things like this in these texts. Which,
and you'd already
because I already had experiences of guides, so in my kind of limited worldview, I thought, well, maybe what they're experiencing is something like what I experience. But I was looking for that piece of golden light to come from, some tome. I'd open up a book over, however many, years, and suddenly the wisdom of the ages would kind of, fall out into me. And
so you became an omnivorous reader of different esoteric texts.
And the library in that time, it was absolutely full. The occult section, in South Leeds, the library on Belle Isle Road, it was absolutely crammed with a regular stock of esoteric books, religious books, mystical.
So you got them all out and read them?
Bit by
Colin
bit.
Wilson and all this.
All those books, yes. But also things on parapsychology and on world religions and philosophy and mysticism. But initially to understand my own experiences.
Right.
But what I ended up doing is, because there was no information in those books about, this is a practice and we do X, Y, Z.
Right.
There was none of that.
Okay.
So through my communication with the spirit world, I was told, well, that's really talking about this. And it was kind of helping me translate.
Would be reading the book, and then you get messages from spirit.
Helping me translate what I was reading into my own understanding or into my own experience. So that was really powerful for me, and I still do that to this day. If I read
a book with help,
with help,
heavenly guides,
and if I attend a lecture, I've attended lectures with really enlightened Tibetan lamas and kind of teachers and so on, and even while they're speaking, I'm taking kind of side notes of personal thoughts and intuitions that kind of come in while I'm hearing the words and so on. So that was my initial process. Kind of,
What about you were presumably at school?
I was terrible.
Did you get taught religious studies? Did that come into your horizon?
I really enjoyed.
How did you get on with RE? Because I'm an RE teacher.
I really enjoyed religious studies.
Right.
And we did all religions. We didn't just stick with Christianity.
Okay. Was this a state school?
Just a regular school.
Comprehensive.
Yeah. Well, I went to the same primary school became a middle school, so I stayed at the same school until I was 13.
Right.
And then I went to the local girls' high school.
Okay. What was it called?
William Gascoigne Girls' High.
Okay.
No longer exists. It's it's something else now.
And you got religious studies once a week or something?
Yeah, pretty much.
And it was taught all different world religions.
Yeah.
And you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. But I didn't like school. No. So I kind of, did my best not to go, because the kids were really, kind of, nasty kids, and I didn't enjoy
bullying and all that usual
I was
stuff.
Bullied a lot, because when you're small, you don't have that kind of editing factor of I've seen this with you, or I dreamt that about you, and then suddenly you kind of picked out as being a little bit weird or a bit odd or something like that.
So you were teased because you were.
Oh, relentlessly.
The witch or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
so many things it's impossible to kind of,
But you can remember incidents?
Absolutely, yeah.
Really?
A lot
and
of
the
incidents.
staff didn't see what was going on?
Well, in those days, you just didn't say anything, and even if the staff did see, it was kind of, oh well, let's not bother ourselves with that.
So they didn't. Yeah, there wasn't much consciousness about it.
No.
Yeah.
So I went to school 2.5 days a week, and that was my.
And you were off
education.
sick the other days.
Well, my mum was always very good. She'd write a little note saying, Susan's not feeling very well or something like that, whether it was true or not. But and on the days when I wasn't at school, of course, I was always reading, all the books from the library.
So that was your proper study time.
So that was my real study time. I was self-taught, by spirit, pretty much.
Yeah, and did you get on with your head of religious studies? You didn't talk to him or her about it?
Well, we had.
Do you remember?
I remember on one occasion that when we were talking about kind of heaven and hell and all these sort of things, and I said something quite kind of controversial at the time, just in one conversation, as the teacher came around, and I said, I believe that there are spirits in trees and that they can communicate with us. And he said, if you believe that, you're going to go to hell. So no more mention of any of that kind of thing.
Right.
But the draw towards nature and the draw towards all life has got spirit. Everything has got an animating intelligence.
Right. That was, you put this together, you're sort of animist.
Pretty much. That all things have got an intellect behind it, no matter how basic or simple or how advanced.
Everything's a manifestation of the one spirit, as it were.
So, I was very interested in different religions and also their experience of the spiritual or of the magical, because I became very interested in things like ancient paganism, which kind of predated kind of named gods, but looking at ancestors and ancestor veneration.
Right, and you studied a bit of anthropology for that.
Yes, all from the same library, So, there were lots of things that interested me.
Right.
About,
so when did you leave school then?
I was 15, and I left school with nothing to say I'd ever been there at all.
No O-levels?
No O-levels, A-levels, GCSEs, not a thing.
Right, but you did have this, they hadn't at least dented your abiding passion, your thirst for knowledge.
I would never have it dented by anyone.
Right. So you carried on with that after you left school?
Yeah.
Presumably you worked and...
When I left school, I was 15 and I was in a bookshop. And a young Indian man came, actually he was Pakistani, he came in and he was looking for a book called Bring Out Magic in Your Mind by Al-Quran. And I'd seen it in another shop, and the girl behind the counter, she was saying, I can order it for you, I can get it in. And I just said to him, it's in another shop, and I just told him where it was.
Okay.
And he got talking to me, and he said, are you interested in all of this then? Because I was in the Mind, Body, Spirit section. And I said, well, yes. He said, can you do readings? And I said, yes. So he was my first client. And we arranged to meet the following Thursday. And we went to a little cafe around the corner. And, and I sat with him and tuned in. And it was just for the enjoyment of just doing it. It wasn't for money or anything like that.
Right.
But I did the reading for him, and at the end he opened his wallet and produced a £5 note, and he said, in my religion it is believed that you have to pay the seer or Allah will withhold all the good things that have been promised. And I thought, that's interesting, but I've got this £5 note, wow.
Right. And he was a Muslim.
He was a Muslim.
Yeah.
And about 2 weeks later, because we kind of swapped phone numbers and so on, about 2 weeks later he called me, and his brother wanted a reading, and then a cousin. So before I knew where I was looking at most of the Islamic community in Beeston, another part of Leeds. So all the neighbours, from this initial man, it was very much.
So you're doing readings for them all, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. Amazing. And I even chose brides as well. Kind of having photos presented of this girl's in Pakistan, this girl's in Canada, this person.
So they came
to
you to help.
What's her character? Is she a good girl? Is she a bad girl? Is she, and all the kind of things. So here I was suddenly telling them...
The age of 16 or...
15, 16. Yeah. About, this is the best woman for you, and things like
Fascinating,
this.
yeah. And isn't that the same part of Leeds where the later the whole sort of Al Qaeda sympathiser groups?
Yes,
based?
around those areas.
7/7, you know, the bombing in London.
Yeah, they came from Beeston. Yeah.
So it's ironic. Some of the people, presumably not the people you were counseling.
No.
I mean.
But all from those areas. Yeah.
Right.
But that was my first experience of working with people, of course, and they were very exotic because they'd got all the ladies had got nice flowing dresses on and all that kind of thing. And
but it's a very multicultural area, Leeds,
very, yes.
But that's one of its beauties and charms.
But where I lived, it was kind of 100% white.
Okay. Different part of Leeds.
South Leeds, Belle Isle, Middleton. It was very, very white at the time. It's a little different now, but.
And you weren't getting many clients there then.
Maybe one or two, a handful, but most of my inroads were made in kind of North Leeds and of course in Beeston with all these Asians. So I started to get information that was very specific to Asian cultures that I'd not not studied. I started to hear information from people who had passed on, who gave me words in Punjabi or in Urdu and things like that.
Which languages you
languages
didn't know
I don't know.
And you would share them, and
yes,
they were accurate.
and let's say yes, that means or I'll have to find out what that means, and I needed to go get Grandad and say what does this mean. So
did you have any teachers, or was this all self-taught?
At that time,
you were clairaudient.
Clairvoyant, and clairsentient. So that means that you can see clearly the spirit world and the information in kind of image form.
So tell us about that. Let's say you're doing a reading for somebody and they say, should I go to Canada and become a doctor?
Okay. Well, firstly,
what do you get?
People don't sort of they don't sort of present a thing to me. They don't say, I'm in the middle of a dilemma. I don't get any of that.
Right.
Usually people come to me and they just sit there, and I tune into their energy, into to their communicating spirit people. They may have Grandad or Mum or whoever that wants to sort of chat. But I just firstly tune into the person's vibration to see what is uppermost in their energy, what is concerning them.
Right.
But I often say to people, I'm not happy unless images are kind of bouncing off the walls at me. Whereas some people who are clairvoyant, it's mostly going on inside the head or inside the mind.
So you see images as it were outside?
I see outside objectively and also subjectively in the mind. But when I'm working, often things will bounce off the walls, and I'll see things kind of manifest around me.
Right.
And I remember on one occasion, my partner, he said to, because I mentioned something I said to someone, and I didn't give any of the details away, but I said, there was something about this. And he said, where did you get that from then? Did you get that, from the tarot cards? I said, no, I got it from the curtains. Because, everything is a tool, and because I started learning the tarot when I was about 9 years old, so...
Okay, so you use the tarot as well for some of these readings?
From time to time, yeah. Depends what people want, but I think the tarot is a really, really powerful tool, which it's been much maligned, really. But all those kind of divination tools like runes and tarot and...
the I Ching?
I Ching, yes, I have used the I Ching. And again, because it's a kind of, you do the kind of coins or sticks, and you kind of find out what the writing is, and it doesn't give you a great deal of kind of freedom to kind of explore.
No, the tarot's
the
maybe
intuitive,
a bit nice because you can intuit.
Yeah, you can.
And the runes especially.
Yes.
They're
So
more simple.
when I first started looking at tarot, I actually came across in a jumble sale an old Swiss IJJ deck, which has got very little imagery on it. You've got 10 sticks and the 2 cups and all those things. So there's nothing to grab the imagination. But I found those really useful, as in bringing out the psychic faculty or the visual faculty, because there's nothing to kind of give you a clue or a cue on the deck itself.
Okay. And what about, so you, amongst your studies of different world religions, you got quite interested in studying ancient paganism, you said.
Yes.
And And then you met some of the contemporary pagans in Britain. Tell us a bit about your adventures with.
Well, I was at a psychic fair when I was about 19, and you know, people they were talking about groups and, you know, various things, and I did get involved in a small group. You know, I went along to, you know, kind of discussion groups and gatherings and so on. But my main influence, I had a really, really wonderful teacher that I kind of came across pretty much not by accident, because I'd heard his name before, but I didn't know who he was or where he was or how to get in contact with him. But I approached the person who was sort of mentioning this chap, and I said, oh, I'm really interested. And so he kind of contacted him and sort of asked if it was okay for me to kind of go along and meet him.
Right.
And he became my spiritual teacher, and I worked with him for 15 years.
Right.
And I went every fortnight for the whole day on the Saturday.
Very right.
And he was
for 15 years.
For 15 years, and
that's a lot of work.
He was a Kabbalist and a Hermetic philosopher and a magician, and yeah, he looked into nature religions, and you name it, he explored it.
Right.
And I think probably.
And what was his name?
Well, he went by the name of Brother RBB. You know, but
right.
I mean, he was just such a wonderful man. He was Italian by birth.
Right.
But he'd settled in West Yorkshire, and with such a marvellous intellect. And he influenced pretty much, probably about 40–50% of my understanding of reality.
So what age were you when you met him then?
I was 23 when I met him.
Okay.
And
so you were 38 when you.
Yeah.
And he was British Italian.
It was completely Italian. He came to the UK in 1921,
right.
and you know, he was such a lovely, lovely man with such an amazing character. But he was very self-effacing. And
do you know which part of Italy he was from?
So it was on the outskirts of Rome. You know, that was kind of his family
right.
background.
So he spoke Italian, obviously.
He spoke Italian,
yeah.
but never
Did
to
you
me.
learn? No, you.
No, but I do speak Italian, but I didn't learn it from him.
What? But his full name, you told me earlier, was Richard Bartle.
Yes.
Vitelli.
That's right. Yeah.
But where's the Bartle bit?
When he was in the army,
right.
the other guys couldn't say his surname.
Vitelli.
So they just gave him another name.
Oh God! They could just call him Richard Bartle.
They could have done, yeah. And but they just gave him this other name because they you know, couldn't be bothered.
Was that in World War II then? He was in the.
Yes. Yeah.
He was in the.
Infantry. I'm not entirely sure. It was in the Battle of Monte Cassino. That was one of the the things he was involved in.
Ah.
But it was
presumably on the British side.
Yes.
Not the Italian.
On the British side.
Yeah, okay,
but a really fascinating character. But when you went, you know, there was never a structure of lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3.
Right.
You know, you kind of go for tea and cakes, and there'd be lots of discussion of what I did in the war, and you know, kind of everything was wrapped up in
his
parable.
own autobiography kind of thing.
No, it was not really, because it was kind of things were wrapped up in parable, and you had to kind of unwrap the inner meaning, the inner kernel of what was trying to be conveyed to you.
Okay.
So you know, he kind of made me look at the bigger picture of things. You know, he's very interested in cosmology and angelics, and
did he do exercises with you? I mean, did you do meditation practices?
What we actually did, I mean, I received initiations from him, which were more to do with Hermetic kind of practices and so on. But he kind of picked me out as being a master exorcist. So he trained me in every form of spirit release possible.
Okay. He wanted you to help with exorcism.
Yes, yeah. So all of his paraphernalia, his ritual implements, which were for kind of ceremonial exorcism, you know, I now have. I have all of his, you kind of, you know, sticks and wands and, you know, all these sort of things.
And he was the guy who was into Alice Bailey, is that right?
He was very influenced by Alice Bailey.
Right, so he was sort of into Theosophy as well.
Theosophy, I mean, and that is something that, you know, I'm also very interested in, because you see the mixture of different religions and different thought processes from sometimes very different backgrounds and cultures.
Right.
And you get this sort of wonderful mixture of all things being connected.
And the search for the unity between
the unity, because, you know, at various, because I've gone to theosophical meetings and lodges and lectured at these places.
Yeah.
And you can go in and you can talk about absolutely anything from any any culture or anything. And there's no one ever to say, I don't believe in that, or that's rubbish, or, oh, it's outside my world. You can talk about anything.
Yeah, you can also ask critical reason and evidence to be used.
Yes, yes. But there's this great feel of exploration and discovery. But also,
so did you read Blavatsky and Bailey yourself?
I have The Secret Doctrine, and I've kind of opened it a few times.
It's unreadable.
It's
as a whole
absolutely
thing,
unreadable.
But it's amazing.
But you can kind of open it in sections and,
sure,
and kind of get
something.
little, kind of something to kind of meditate upon and so on.
I've just been researching Blavatsky on Druids.
Yes.
For paper.
But I was very interested in Annie Besant and Leadbeater, and I found their explanations of things like the astral plane and the mental planes.
And this guy Richard turned you on to Theosophy, did he, or did you found?
Well, after Richard died, there was this huge gap, and I thought, well. And by accident, someone invited me to a Theosophical meeting,
right.
and kind of having gone to lots of other things and been kind of left a bit cold, and thought there's nothing going to give me the depth of tuition or the depth of discussion that I've been used to, because you kind of you've been used to talking about high philosophy in a kind of kind of cosy way.
Was this in Leeds?
In Dewsbury.
Dewsbury, right.
And then you find that you're in some kind of discussion on chakras or something, but it's all very kind of Western kind of. I've read 2 books and a pamphlet. Someone goes and gives a talk on it.
Right.
So I was kind of spiritually bereft and thought, well, where am I going to find the
This was in 2003, was it?
Maybe before that I'd kind of gone along to a couple of it must have been around that time.
Right.
Yes, I think it had to have been.
And there's a library at the Theosophical Lodge, you were saying.
Yes, the one in Leeds is quite a big library, and it's a beautiful carved wooden panels, and it's a really nice room, really nice building.
Right.
So
have you been to the headquarters in Adyar in India?
No, I haven't. No. But
right, fascinating.
But I did find a lot of interest in kind of theosophical teachings and so on. Because you see, a lot of the understanding of the spiritual worlds that people involved in mediumship and spiritual communication and spiritualism and so on.
Right.
The answers that they're searching for, they're not in their traditional teachings. You've got lots of practices within spiritualism, but you don't have any answers to the big questions.
There's no metaphysical discussion of what's going on there.
The layers and levels of the other world, and
you have to go to Theosophy and other things.
Well, and other things, yes,
yeah.
Not just Theosophy, but lots of other world traditions that kind of explain in a kind of systematic way the development of the soul post-mortem and things like that.
So tell us a bit. So then you got involved with the pagan community, and you met people connected with the Wicca scene and stuff. Tell us a bit about that, and how you became the Pagan Chaplain.
Going back some time, I'd been working in America, and I'd been doing some workshops and talks and lectures in Dallas, and I ended up going to Northern California, and I met a writer there called Donald Michael Craig. And he recommended that I ought to, get ordained as a minister or something like that, So I thought, okay, why not? So I applied for this university kind of course that was like a ministerial, training thing. Yes. So at the end of this, you had to write kind of 25 dissertations on different aspects of world religion and so on. It was really nice,
It's like an ecumenical interfaith training,
So at the end of this, I was at a party in York, and some friends, they were saying, "Oh, you've got this, dodgy certificate, what are you going to do with it?" And I thought, well, I'm not going to do anything with it. I can't, what can I do with it? And they suggested, well, there are loads of people at places like Leeds University that are searching for guidance, and it's so easy to meet the wrong sorts of people. If you come to a new town, new city, and you don't know anyone, but also to fulfil that pastoral role for people interested in non-Christian religions, because at Leeds at the time, and I think it's still the case now, that there were 11 denominations of Christian chaplains, and there wasn't anyone really for people involved in indigenous religions or shamanism or spiritualism or paganism or the various branches of kind of esoteric study. So I kind of presented myself, rang up the chaplaincy centre, and I spoke to someone there, and in theory the guy said, yeah, that sounds like a really brilliant idea, but we need to put this before various kind of committees and so on. And the final thing was, well, you need to kind of present yourself at the Occult Society meeting, and kind of ask them if they might be interested in having you, because they would be your flock really. So,
that was in the University Occult
Society. In the University Occult Society. So I went along, but I knew that quite a lot of those people anyway, because I'd met them at various moots and gatherings and things. So I stood up at the end of a lecture and said, there's a possibility of me becoming a pagan chaplain at the university. Would you be for that? Let's have a show of hands. And well, there was uproar. There was kind of whoops and hollers, and everyone was clapping, and it was like a really brilliant idea. And so that's how I started there.
What year was that then?
That was in 1994.
94.
Yeah. So it was a long time, but it led to attending conferences and giving lectures and things like that on the kind of various aspects of spirituality, but also looking at pagan traditions and so on.
Did you get a stipend for that?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
Nothing.
It's all just off your own expenses.
Off my own.
A little office or anything?
Nope. Worked from home and met people in kind of coffee bars and things like that.
So did you get to use the chapel for your ceremonies? No, you didn't even get to use the chapel.
Not a thing. Nothing. No.
But just the title.
Yeah, just the the possibility to kind of to help people, because that was my interest, and I soon realised that there were people who had come from, for example, Thailand and Malaysia, that were following ancestral religious paths, and they were working very much with the ancestors, but they had got nowhere they could kind of go or discuss that sort of spirituality. It was all very alien to people who were trying to maintain their spiritual
links. They were
links.
at Leeds studying for a degree.
Yeah, doing degrees.
Their own spiritual path was indigenous.
Yes.
So you
kind of
became their
ancestor
chaplain.
veneration. Yeah. So I worked very closely with quite a few people who had come from kind of Southeast Asia and places like that, and it was really very interesting, because it made me more aware of wanting to kind of find out more about these kind of shamanic type paths and so on.
And did you travel in those countries as well?
I did actually, yes. There was an opportunity came up to go and spend some time in Borneo, and you've got to show them your cool stuff first before they start showing you their cool stuff.
Okay.
So I found that, I through the help of various people, I had the invitation to go to Borneo, and I stayed with a lady called Rosalind, but she knew politicians and people who were kind of in the know. Right. And I was at it was kind of like a beauty contest. I'd been invited to the gathering of the clans in this very nice hotel in a place called Sriaman in Borneo, in Sarawak. And this chap Jimmy, he was sitting on the top table, and we got talking. He's this politician, and we were talking about the old Iban traditions and the rites and the ceremonies, and the word that they used for a shaman is a manang. So he said, you come to my house, and he gave me a day to come, and he said, come in a few days' time, and we can talk about this in much more depth. So I thought, oh great. So I went with Rosalind, and we turned up at his house, but he'd arranged academic researchers from 5 divisions of Borneo to come to talk about shamanism and spirit contact, going back from ancient times to current practices.
So you got like a private seminar with them all?
So, absolutely.
Amazing.
And I was there for about 5 or 6 hours, and I filmed it all, the entire.
You recorded it?
Yes.
Right.
Because there was so much.
Speaking in English?
Yeah, speaking in English.
Yeah.
There was such a lot came out, and then from that, I was invited to attend ceremonies and gatherings and so on.
Right.
But they, they want you to do, some, healing or something like that, or to, to help in some way.
Did you meet some of the shamans as well as
I met lots and lots of shamans.
You did?
Yes, and
did you talk to them about one-to-one?
Yes, and I had an experience where I was at a thing in a place called Scran, and they're more pagan there, because obviously Christianity's kind of infiltrated Borneo in various degrees, and I was told there's been these 2 pots where they regard their ancestors as residing in these big ginger jars, huge ginger jars.
Right. Their ashes aren't in there?
No, I'm not sure what's in there, but
they think the
ancestors. This is the physical, kind of home of the ancestors.
Right.
But 2 of these pots had kind of smashed for no reason overnight, and it was kind of, action stations. There's going to be like an all-night ritual. This isn't kind of honouring the harvest. This is kind of action stations. So I was taken along by this chap who was going to translate for us the entire night's ritual.
Okay.
And he said it will start at 9 o'clock. So I thought, well, okay, but I was taken to so many different longhouses on the way. I kind of, thought, is it this one? No, no, it's something else. And kind of wherever you went, you were kind of, presented with someone who had a problem, and can you help? And so
really? So you were working as well?
Yes, I was working and doing, kind of spiritual help and so on. So as we actually got to the place that the ritual was going to happen, I saw all these warriors coming out of the jungle, in kind of loincloths with spears and things.
In vision? Or in
I
reality?
saw them in my vision, but externally, I saw them coming out of the jungle. And I said to the translator, I said, my God, there's a lot of dead men on this road. And they said, really? We went into the longhouse, and we got to the point where the bard was calling all the dead warriors from all the generations back to come and assist the ritual.
Right.
And all the dead warriors were kind of, coming up the road,
You saw them?
I saw them.
Yeah.
Because it started at 8 o'clock, not 9 o'clock. We were kind of an hour into it.
Yeah.
But the whole thing of... They do their ceremonies where they have a bard who remembers these ancient mythological stories and invocations and prayers in kind of ritual form, and it's in 140,000 verses.
Wow.
And they know it all.
And they memorise the whole thing.
It's all memorised.
What language is this?
It's in Iban.
Iban, okay.
So, it's this incredible experience, but as we went through the night, it felt like we were rising up on the plains, going up into the other world to kind of gather the power of the ancestors, and then to bring the blessing, the summer of heaven, so to speak, down to the longhouse to create balance and order.
Right. And did he get these 144,000 verses?
140,000 verses.
Is that recited in the one night? Or was
yes, all night.
All night. It's like a continual
It's a continual speaking.
It's not been written down, this text? Is it just memorised?
It may be written down, but as far as I know, it's kind of given from word of mouth.
Do you know what it was called?
I can find out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm interested.
Because I had to kind of re-research some of that information for a talk I gave, but I do have the information. It's just not in my head.
Yeah. So look, Susan, I'm fascinated to hear about your adventures, abroad, in Borneo and places like that. I know you've been to Egypt and met some initiatory women's groups there, working with ancient traditions. I'm interested though, what have you found in Britain? Do you think the Wiccan and Druid traditions and so on, do you think Britain has its own indigenous ancestral traditions?
That's difficult to say because I'm very interested in all forms of religion, and I really feel that if you go out into the woods and you spend time in nature, that those spirits will guide you and teach you and present you with techniques and practices that are perhaps long forgotten. So and also those traditions can be handed on and given to others as well. So in those respects, the modern Wicca movement is not in any way related to ancient practices that were kind of indigenous.
So Gerald
religions.
Gardner, you don't think?
No, I don't think so.
He spent time in Borneo, didn't he?
He did, yes. He spent time in Borneo.
Did you meet anyone out there who'd met him? Or?
No. And the place that he was based, no one had heard of, but that doesn't mean to say it doesn't exist. But the rituals that he described, I think in one of the books, it talks about a ritual which is actually an Islamic ritual. It's not an Iban ritual. It's an Islamic rite that he describes.
So he doesn't make that clear in the text.
No.
But
it
may
be possible that he didn't even know. It's like a bunch of people here that are local people, and they're doing some sort of ceremony.
Yeah, he didn't find out.
No. But within Wicca, you can see lots of parallels to practices that are in Malaysian Islam.
Right, but you never met Gardner, did you? He died.
Yes, long time back.
But you met some people who knew him?
Yes,
is that right?
yeah. I was friends with Cecil Williamson, and he knew Gardner.
Right. He took over the Museum of Witchcraft.
That's right.
Which is found on the Isle of Man.
And he was a very good friend of one of my influences, one of my very dear friends, Brownie, and she went to live in the same village that Cecil lived in.
Where was that?
In Witheridge in Devon.
Okay.
But we got Cecil to come up and give a talk at Leeds University, and that was a kind of fabulous
He's dead
evening.
now,
He passed on, yes, but he was in his 90s when he died. But he was a really fascinating man.
Was he? What was he? A Wiccan or?
What he did is actually he went around meeting folk magicians and hedge witches and people who were involved in a continuity of folk magic.
In Britain? In
Britain, yeah.
Right.
And often, it's kind of, Granny's died, there's something odd in the cellar, can you come and look at it? So Cecil would go and he'd find, what is this? And he'd find, puppets and various things.
Which he'd then take off to the museum.
He'd take off to the museum and
that's in Boscastle now?
Yes.
Did he move it down there from the Isle of Man?
Yes, yeah.
Right.
He also had a smuggler's museum as well, but I did know from him that he had enough stuff to make 3 museums of magic and witchcraft. But there was only one, but he had enough stuff in storage.
Amazing.
And he was an amazing guy, and he documented, quite a lot of the folk practices that were dying out, because obviously, Granny's dead. We never asked Granny anything about what she did on a Tuesday evening with her friends. We're a bit stuck really.
So what did you talk to him?
In depth.
What did he think of the modern Wiccan movement, the Alexandrian traditions and so on, sort of new initiatory structures versus the old style?
It was a
heritage?
bit kind of, this ain't like it was in the old days. It's completely different, but it is something else. It is a modern version. It's a rebirth. It's a rebirth. People are doing their best to try to create something or reconnect with something, and I think that's a point.
So he was sympathetic to it.
Yes, that people trying to reconnect to something is very very important. But in my own personal view, when you get a lot of people that they think they can go on a weekend workshop, or they can go on a six or seven evening classes of shamanism or something like that. That's not really how you're supposed to do it.
It's a longer process.
It's a much longer process, and it's really a journey of self. That you present yourself with your soul on a plate, to the powers around you, to the local spirits, to the ancestors, and you will be elevated by their power, by their input. And you'll know if they have a smell of you. They'll know if your intention is not right. Yeah. If you go to gain success and material glory, then they'll realise that straight away. And you'll have negative experiences.
Right.
You'll meet dodgy people that will give you kind of bad advice. But the true advice is your own connection to the other world, to your own spirit people, to the spirits that are around you in your own hometown. And I really believe that, you know, a lot of people that go down to Glastonbury and they go to Avebury and Stonehenge searching to connect to some kind of power point. Whereas my own personal view that the spirits that are in your own local woodland, or that, you know, within your garden, or, you know, just feet away from where you are, they know your needs, they know your spirit, your nature, they know what you are about, because they are also of that same vibration, maybe on a higher frequency, but of the same vibration. So in connecting to that power that is part of your own heritage, it also puts you in touch with the ancestors, and it puts you in touch with the power of the earth where you live, the power of the moon and the stars, and you know, the solar energies, and just making the searcher, you know, the kind of part of the answers themselves.
Do you know anyone in Britain who's been working with archaeologists? I mean, we live here in Castle Mews, not far from Kilmartin, which is a very famous ancient Bronze Age region, one of the most heavily used in ancient Europe, 3000 BC and earlier. And there's lots of discussion about who they were. You know, were they Gaelic speaking? Were they Pictish? And nobody really knows.
No.
All we've got is archaeological remains and engravings and so on. Do you know if anyone's any seers like yourself have worked with archaeologists going to sacred sites or ancient sites in Britain, to tuning into the ancestors you talk about?
That is something that...
Because shouldn't somebody be doing that?
I think that is part of you know, some of the practices. I remember the reading of a man who was trying to get kind of this archaeological seership. Yeah. You know, kind of moving forward and so on.
Right.
And going to sites and tuning in. And
was that in Britain? Or?
Yes, it's in the UK. Right. But quite a lot of these things, it is subjective, you know, because there isn't someone there to say, well, that's not right. Which, if you get...
No, you can double check stuff.
Yes, you can double check things.
Yeah.
But someone's personal experience of an energy, it's their personal experience of it. So it's only when you kind of, you know, double check historically.
Yeah, if you take 2 or 3 on different occasions and they all say the same thing,
that's a good kind of marker, isn't it? If you've got your kind of continuity of experience from different people. Yeah. But you know, that is an area that could be developed. It could be developed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
but your own ancestors are they from Yorkshire or?
Yes.
So you're Yorkshire born and bred.
Yes.
And I mean, my mother was from Yorkshire, up near Sutton and Craven. What do you think the Yorkshire soul or the ancestors are? What's the soul of the Yorkshire people?
It's lovely. No, the soul of the Yorkshire spirit, it is very much it's an earth energy. It's very strong, connected to the earth and to, you know, those kind of hard working. You know, it's a hard working spirit, as are the people. Yeah. You look to the spirits of humans in areas. What is the spirit of their nature? That the guiding genus of that area will also be of that same nature, because in pushing out the energies to, you know, just in their existence, can't help but be absorbed. So, you know, people who are hard working, or people who are friendly, or people who are, you know, you go to some places and the energy just feels completely inapproachable. And in some respects, the people are like that as well.
Wasn't it the Celtic tribe, the Brigantes?
Yes,
they not
in that area, yes.
In that part of Britain?
Yeah.
Are there any remnants from those archaeological, the Celtic tribes?
Yes, there are, yes.
Because the Vikings then came in later, didn't they, and the Anglo-Saxons?
Yes, but the going back to the kind of worship of Brigantia, it's a very powerful, deeply rooted tradition. Which annoys me tremendously, that when people start discovering paganism, they turn to the kind of classical gods, or to the Egyptian gods, the Norse gods, and that, you know, we have such a rich heritage with the spirits of the land, and in connecting with what we have or where we are, it will serve our spirits so much more. than trying to connect with some foreign deities.
Where's the sacred sites of Yorkshire then? Are there some stone circles? Or?
Yes, there are on Ilkley Moor. I mean, I remember Ilkley has been a kind of massive place of kind of people doing things, and there are stone circles up there.
Right.
Standing stones and so on.
Okay.
So there are lots of.
But York itself, was there an ancient Celtic settlement in York before the Romans?
Yes, but a lot of it to do with around the river. The power of the river.
Right.
And
So
the goddess
making
of
offerings,
the river, offerings and so on, which kind of connects to a lot of world cultures where we work with the spirits of the river, and these are power places. So such a lot of connections to spirits that would be equated to kind of martial type energies as well. So there are such a connection to those
the warrior
types of beings.
Yeah.
But a lot of people now they're not working with those powers. Of the pagans that I'm familiar with. Or
right.
Well,
you're interesting, sort of academically, if you don't mind me saying so, because you've been interested in that pagan world. You've researched it. You've been one of the leaders in some way of it. But you're also very interested in the psychic world and the spiritualist community.
Yes.
So you bring a whole extra dimension to both, in effect, and I think hopefully both are enriched.
Yes.
So to the pagan scene you can bring actual practical spiritualist techniques, and to the spiritualist community you can bring the knowledge of all those indigenous religions, which is something maybe they don't have either. Tell us now, let's move on to discuss your work in the spiritualist community, because you've been involved with the spiritualist movement for a long time, going to the churches and so on, and getting some nourishment from it, and then developing your own gifts as a seer and as a spiritualist. Tell us what those gifts are, a little more detail, and what you're doing with them.
Having always been able to kind of see things around people, that has been part of my just part of me. It's part of
Right. Ever since you were like a child hiding in the cupboard under the stairs.
Yes, doing my kind of self retreats in the electric cupboard. Very much to do with developing the powers of the mind, and I always believed that the power came from the head, whereas we have to start to think about the heart as well, and other aspects of ourselves. But the feeling of communicating with someone's loved ones who, until this point, I believe dead and gone. That we'll never speak to mum or dad or granny again. Those people are out. They've gone behind the door. I remember when my father died that the vicar came and he said that it's like he'd gone behind a door, and I thought, this is stupid. No, of course he hasn't gone behind a door, but that is not how a medium would look at life. It's
moved into another dimension.
He's moved into another dimension, and he's still around. He's still able to communicate and speak to us, but he's just lost his body, and he's gone into a higher frequency, or they've gone into higher dimensional states. So they're still very, very much available to those who have the right equipment.
Right. And
the right equipment would be the equivalent of, if we just have a regular analogue TV, well, obviously we're only just going to get the main channels. But, if you have this kind of extra faculty developed to a heightened state, then of course you can pick up all those, kind of satellite channels as well that mean absolutely nothing to those people who don't have, cable or Sky or any of those.
Do you think originally all humans had those skills and gifts?
I believe yes, and there has been research that's looked into this, which, some believe it's sort of, the jury's out. But there was a man called Julian Jaynes, and he looked very clearly into the bicameral mind, that the ancient man was working from both chambers of both sides of the brain, and one side spoke to the other. So it was always believed that the daemon or the spirit guide or the personal god was continually giving advice and guidance.
Socrates talks about
yes,
his daemon.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
So connecting to the ancient currents and the ancient religions and philosophies of the genus or the genius, the daemon, the inspiration, the inner voice.
But in your experience, if you can describe it subjectively, when you're getting some kind of information from this inner voice, is it something that comes from within you, or is it like an external something?
If I'm connected to someone who has passed on, and it's a loved one of someone who was, you know,
like a client who's come to see you,
like someone sitting before me or whatever, the voice I hear will take on the kind of the pattern of that person's accent. So I hear a voice, but it's not my voice. And generally, when I'm just working with my own psychic ability, often I receive that information in an audible fashion, and it's always a male voice that I hear. And the voice is within my head, not out here. You know, it's not external to me.
So it's not like you hear someone whispering out here.
No.
Or whatever. It's inside.
It is. It's like the memory of someone's voice. Rather
do you think
than,
it's obviously a telepathic process?
These
spirit beings somehow telepathically commune with
That's
Seer.
right. Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah, and they have to. What happens, the mechanics of it, is that the spirit world will blend with the energetic field of the medium. So the more meditations and things like that you do, where you kind of work on building the aura, strengthening the energy field.
Then there's more for them
to blend with.
Right.
So that rather than just kind of getting kind of Harry, Huddersfield, Cancer, you've got more of, I am Dad, I am Harry, I'm from Huddersfield, and you hear more or experience more. And it may be visual, it may be sensory, it may be, you hear it. There are so many ways in which the spirit world work with us. And but I think it's very important that you kind of don't throw anything away, regarding techniques and philosophies and ideas, because all things go to support, the mediumistic process.
Yeah.
For example, I often get soldiers, people who have been, in wars and died, serving the country and so on, and I get a lot of things like cap badges and regiments and people being blown up and things like that. Now, I'm not really interested in war history, but I get a lot of it, and I find it very exciting. It's very interesting to me. But so maybe because of that, there is a kind of a flow of all the warriors kind of, she's all right, she'll do.
Oh right.
But the advice generally when people are looking into mediumship is the more interested you are in life, the more that the spirit people have got to kind of work with. If you have someone connecting with you who is a surgeon, and the person who is the medium knows absolutely nothing about medicine, then in some respects the information is going to be truer. But if the person is experiencing something in their vision and having no idea what they're looking at, they can't really put it across they can't articulate what they're experiencing. So I'm very interested in geography and history and all those things. So if I get someone communicating with me, and they've lived in, for example, Africa or India or somewhere like that, it's more likely that I'll be able to kind of resonate with their vibration because I'm aware of something. And the other day I was talking to a client, and he was saying, that there'd been some issues and so on, and then suddenly I became aware of Java. And then I heard very clearly Yogyakarta. I said, this lady's in Yogyakarta, isn't she? And they said, yes, she's in Yogyakarta. But because I am kind of familiar with, places.
You can say it.
Yes, I involve myself in things like, history and geography and...
So the intelligence of the medium is important.
Yes, because there used to be a time
the education is
yes,
important.
There used to be a time when they say the less cluttered your mind is, the more they can work with, because it's not you.
But you don't agree with that?
No, the current belief is that the more you can kind of educate yourself on the world, on music and
the
various things.
Generally all-rounded.
Yes, if you hear music playing and you think, I've got Dad here and he's telling me that he's playing me some music and I can hear this music but I don't know what it is. For me to say I can hear Buddy Holly and it's a favourite singer of Dad's, because I recognise what I'm hearing.
So the development of your own reasoning powers doesn't hinder the spiritualist medium powers.
What you have to do is to come out of the thought processes, because when you are receiving information, you have to not question it so much, but just kind of relay the information. What happens with mediumship is it starts to go wrong when you bring in your own mind and you start to think, what is that about? I don't understand that. I'm getting this feeling, but I don't understand it. And then you start to think.
Right.
And it's using a lot of power in the brain, because you've got, you receive the information in the visuals, and then you kind of bounce the energy forward to the front of your brain to start thinking about, well, what does this mean? And then, you've got a lot of energy.
Passive,
very, very passive.
Yeah.
And just to trust.
Right.
Because they want to work with our world as much as we want to work with that world. So to be passive and to be accepting. And when I say passive, that's a really unusual thing, because when you're in the act of mediumship, you're kind of caught up in this kind of vortex of power that keeps you held in the energy. So, and that's different when you're doing a one-to-one with a person in front of you, with a client. When you're working on a platform, when you're on the stage, or doing a demonstration, that you're kind of caught up in this kind of energetic vortex.
And you can feel that. It's like an energy vibration.
It's this really strong, very, very active, energetic field that you're held within.
Yeah.
And that's because the spirit world, they're coming closer and closer and closer, until you start to take on maybe some of the mannerisms, some of the hand gestures. You start to feel the bodily sensations. Now, these people don't have bodies anymore. They've lost their body. They have pure mind, pure intelligence.
Right. They have a subtle body, do you think?
That's debatable. That they have memory of what their body was like.
And they have something with which to communicate telepathic thoughts. So
yes, they have mind. And that, because you're aware of someone standing with you, but that. You might kind of tune in and say, I see this lady, and she's about 5'4", she's got spectacles on, she's quite a nicely rounded lady. Now, she doesn't look like that anymore. She's a vibrating.
That was how she looked in her life.
Yes.
Her last life.
Or maybe the last time you saw her, because very often you get some people who will come through, and they weren't very happy with how they turned out at the end. As kind of in the hospital, and
so they want
lost
to
a lot
project
of
their
weight.
earlier image.
So sometimes you may see someone in their heyday, but get a feeling of, I know this person died in their 80s. But
what do you? I mean, this is a silly question. You may not know, but what do you think the soul in itself, the vehicle of manas or mind or whatever, or chitta? I mean, do you know these orb photographs that you've probably seen those?
Yes.
And some people say those orbs are like the soul in its naked, pure form. What do you think the soul actually looks like? Have you ever seen it in any of your experiences?
No, I can't say I have seen a soul. I've seen.
You feel its presence.
Yeah, you feel the presence.
Yeah.
But the one thing that interests me is in things like Dzogchen teachings, where they talk of the visionary experiences that present themselves. The Tibetan
Nyingma Pais.
Yes, the tradition of this is that as visions present themselves, they will be seen as orbs, and then the more you develop with that, you will see that there are faces within the orbs.
Right.
And I'm using orbs because that's the word that people understand in the West.
That's what, but that's what the Tibetan.
Yes, and then as you develop that further, you will see the physical form of deities. Now, they use that word deities, whereas we might use the word guiding influence or a spirit person. So all these things are connected in a very strong way. And
you've taken initiation in Dzogchen teachings, have you? In Tibetan Buddhism?
Through working with Tibetan teachers and masters and
lived
so
in
on.
Nepal and so on.
Yes.
So another part of you's got a Buddhist
an
heritage.
Interest in that kind of thing, because I think they have one of the fullest explanations of consciousness. And how consciousness works.
Tibetan Book of the Dead.
And that is a wonderful way of understanding the nature of reality.
Have you ever used your mediumship skills with Buddhists?
Yes, I have. Because when I was in Nepal, it was so funny, because I was asked what I do for a job, and I said I'm a medium, and they said I'm not quite sure what that is. And I said, well, I talk to people who have died. And now in their tradition, there is a tradition for that. But the medium goes into an altered state and shakes. And
like a trance state.
Yes, a trance state.
Yeah, like an oracle, they call it.
So in the Nepali tradition, you're working with what they call jakri. That's the technical word for like a shaman or spirit medium in that tradition. But the jakri will shake in a kind of uncontrollable manner.
Right.
But when I was telling this gentleman what I did, he started to shake as I brought his father through and gave him evidence of his dad. He started to shake. Oh. I thought this is very interesting. But and obviously he was Buddhist. So the concept of is there a soul? Is it all mind? 49 days are you kind of in your next incarnation? All those things.
Because the Buddhists say there isn't a soul, there's just consciousness.
Different groups will talk about the soul.
Yeah.
All my monks that I was working with in this monastery just outside Kathmandu, they all gave reference to the soul. Every one of them.
Right.
Even though in their particular tradition, they're taught to look more towards mind. The concept of soul
is still useful.
Is still there, yes.
There is a paradox, isn't there, in the Buddhist teachings and Eastern thought, because going back to the orbs thing, if that is the soul, they have this concept of Indra's net. You probably know this, that every part of the universe reflects every other part. So it's like a matrix of these orbs that all reflect each other ad infinitum. So, but that fits with the idea of Atman, the soul, being also Brahman, the universal spirit.
Yes.
So, maybe there's a way of reconciling this philosophically.
Philosophically, that's we've all got kind of aspects that connect to other people in different cultures that we've got something we can draw from, and to share, because I'm beyond labels. I don't like this kind of you're a medium, you're a spiritualist, you're a Hindu, you're a Buddhist, you're a Jew, you're a whatever. Because my own teacher didn't ascribe to labels at all. And he got different faces for different people, or different hats on different days, and all this kind of thing. So I think as time evolves, it's more likely that people will become more soul-centred, that they're working with that soul power, and that the soul will have a certain flavour. As you go into some, when people come to me, I can always tell people that are kind of religious Catholics and practicing Jews. The energy is there, ingrained within them of the
before they even say who they are.
Oh, I never ask people what their personal practices or anything like that. But if I get somebody that is following a particular path, the imprint, because they are entangled with that subject very deeply, it brings into things like quantum entanglement. Whereas if you kind of connect to a subject, not just to people, but if you connect to a subject or to a practice or to a philosophy, that you are forever connected to that through time and space.
You're imbued with that energy.
So the energy moves through you and you are part of it. That gives, kind of creates part of the soul cocktail.
Right. But that's beautiful too. I mean, in Hermann Hesse's Glass Bead Game, the great novel, everybody is part of the universal energy moving around, being imbued with different parts, but we are also all the whole.
Yes.
In that. Have you ever, in your mediumship work, come across any philosophers or sages that you would say on the other planes?
Oh yes. I mean, when you're working with spiritual guides, not people who will kind of be evidence as mum and dad and granny, but people who have kind of moved through all those layers, that have they've kind of gotten rid of the kind of the ego self and all the gross aspects of self, all the kind of hate and fear and anger and greed and all these human emotions are kind of dropped away, and they're just left with pure mind, pure intellect. They do come through and they give guidance still from the higher dimensions. And there are also people working in the spirit world to give information on scientific discoveries and various things that we're trying to understand regarding medicine and things like this. People who are trying to influence artists and philosophers.
So there are sages here, in the alternative dimensions that are trying to bring through great ideas and inspiration. That'd be the work of the muse.
It would be, yes. But the influence. I mean, so many great composers or scientists. I dreamt that. or I had a vision, or
just the idea popped in my head.
It popped in my head, and I don't know where it came from.
Right.
Well,
Steiner talks about that.
That is a very powerful way of connecting to, you know, those teachers that are kind of, you know, might be regarded as, you know, they are in an ascended state. You know, they've gone beyond.
Sure. Beethoven and so on get their great melodies and music from.
And I'm sure that the great painters and philosophers, you know, they're not, you know, they're not just sitting on a cloud, kind of, you know, having apple pie. You know, that they're doing other things and influencing people who are struggling to work with music and composing and or art or philosophy or religion. That moving people into discovery of self. And even people who were nobodies that just sat quietly at home, you know, who were kind of, you know, maybe, you know, quite reclusive, but had got a kind of massive understanding of the nature of the universe, are influencing those from the kind of, you know, back room of the cosmos. You know,
because there's this concept in the Buddhist tradition, the Pratyeka Buddhas, not the public, big, well-known Buddhas, official public enlightened people, but little people that history doesn't know about.
Yes.
I mean, I'm interested, as you know, in transpersonal history, this new field. You're a wonderful example of someone who has this rich transpersonal history, and it's been fascinating to interview you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I feel that mankind as a whole, you know, we are evolving as a planet into those transpersonal fields where stories like yours will become the real story of mankind, rather than, you know, the economics or the industrial processes and so on that the 19th century focused on. I think maybe the next century we should go into these inner spaces.
Yes.
And that's the new frontier, if you want. So you're someone who's explored that. Do you, in your work, I mean, roughly how many people have you sat for? How many clients have you had? Would you say? Are we talking hundreds or thousands? Or?
Maybe, you know, touching thousands, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've never added it up.
Over these years?
Yeah. I've been working for 30 years as a professional psychic and medium.
And so you've got a whole fund of experience to talk from them. Yeah. And
when people, you know, start to work with this power, you know, you can't just kind of, you know, take a few workshops and then decide, you know, I'm going to set myself up as a, you know, private practice doing this, because you know, some people, they need to kind of plant the seed and allow the seed to grow, and, you know, and let's see what the flower turns out, you know, at the end of development kind of thing. So people talk very often about development, but it's more likely, in my belief, a process of unfoldment, not development. So we unfold those, you know, those petals of understanding, so that we can take in more of the divine reality, more of the other world reality. Because it's happening all around us. It's just we're too blind to witness it or to notice it. So in being able to kind of unfold those layers, that we can kind of experience more of those subtle teachings, and you can kind of get a feeling for signs and wonders and things that kind of appear in nature, that are kind of the old kind of oracular stuff that you know, follow the instinct and so on. And very often people, they do get instincts about something, but they go the other way, and they don't believe their own instincts.
Well, the leading paradigm of Western society is secularism and scientism, and so these inner voices, these intuitive things, are often seen as mental instability and so on, and like your mother was trying to hush you up and stop you doing it. I mean, you've been very courageous in your life. Another problem is the way that religion try and monopolise spirituality. I mean, you're someone that's worked with different religious and spiritual teachings, but you've been more an empiricist. I'd say you're a scientist of spirit, because you're working with the actual lived experience. But what's the difference between prophetic skills, would you say? I mean, in the Judeo-Christian Islamic teachings, certain class of people are known as prophets. And they channel messages from God or the archangel, and those are kind of packaged and presented as the definite word of God, and there's no arguing. It goes into a holy text or a book, and a priesthood then dominate the interpretation of it. And now we've got all these religious wars on the planet between Judaism and Islam and Christianity. What's your vision of how can spirit heal these prophetic wars, as I call them?
Well, you see, to come away from the point you were just making, but I just want to say that all mystical groups, going back, through time, they were always led by some inner plane teacher. For example, the Golden Dawn, that Mather's wife, was a medium. Blavatsky had got her, kind of otherworld teachers and so on. And more besides,
and the Sufi orders sort of had the same.
And the Sufi orders, definitely. The Nabi, the Old Testament prophets, it's now understood that the schools of the Nabi, or the prophetic colleges, they were more like shamanic training. That they working with ecstatic states.
So those texts of Isaiah and stuff came out of an oracular college training school.
Yes, and those experiences of being a kind of shamanic person, we imagine a prophet to be someone who, we're being kind of, indoctrinated slightly by what they want us to believe a prophet is, which I think, it doesn't match the historical.
Usually slightly odd.
Yes. Yeah. But also I look at what is a prophet about, because often you can be bringing a teaching through, or you can be kind of like John the Baptist. He was the prophet of Jesus, kind of preparing the way, kind of there's going to be someone coming, he's going to be really, really clever, and so listen to him, kind of preparing the ground for a teaching. And some maybe prophesying about world events or things to come.
I mean, to me, they're like druids, because many of them were quite political. So they were speaking truth to power, to use George Fox's term.
And the interesting thing that I find, really powerful, because when it talks about in some of the the Christian texts about false prophets and real prophets, is that if a false prophet, the actual person that would be a false prophet would say, everything's getting better and God loves you. False prophet. Real prophet, everyone's done terribly bad, and if you don't get yourself sorted out, pull your socks up, we're going to be wiped out and we're going to be in war. Good prophet. So the concept of the false prophet, that's been lost. Nowadays people talk about someone being a false prophet, someone who were, their visions were muddled up and it wasn't quite right, or they made stuff up and lied.
Right.
But the original meaning of a false prophet is that you gave people false hope.
Right.
Rather than telling them the truth.
Yeah.
But in some respects, all the well-known prophets from the Old Testament, they were all kind of doom and gloom.
A lot of them were, although there's always a good bit at the very end.
Yeah.
So just to finish, I mean, what's the good news you'd like to share at the end of this, in midlife stream? How is there good news for the planet, or is it bad? Which prophet are you?
Well, I would say that yes, we are in the process of huge changes that are happening, and personally, I feel that on a personal soul level for humanity, if we look at all, we're all connected and we're all involved with each other's kind of growth and moving forward, that people never grow through good things. They always grow through hardship and struggle and turmoil. So we are in a process of self-cultivation, and also the higher powers, the divine forces, are kind of dragging us up by our bootstraps into a higher function. But usually people develop through hard times and war and so.
So we can look back on 9/11 and the Iraq wars and these horrors we've had to live through as a very hard lesson.
A hard lesson for the kind of physical history of mankind. But on an inner level, so many people have become aware of divinity, or being aware of their own spiritual power, or being aware of I too can make a difference.
Right.
And so many people nowadays are starting to realise that I don't have to put my trust in a priest or an imam or someone who's going to kind of tell me what to think. I can be my own.
And you can go direct to spirit.
Yes, I can go direct to my some people say my angels, my guides, my my connection to the higher powers. And such a lot of people are becoming more aware of their own power,